In 1937, pioneering aviator Amelia Earhart vanished on a flight over the Pacific Ocean. There are hundreds of theories about what happened, along with regular claims of new evidence that supposedly solves the mystery forever. In this video, I'll be taking a hard look at some of these theories and showing the new evidence isn't what it claims to be, and that most searches are probably happening in the wrong places anyway. So was she captured and murdered by Japanese troops for spying, or abducted by aliens? Did she die a castaway on a remote island, get eaten by cannibals or giant crabs, or even fake her own death to live out her life as a housewife in New Jersey? And where is she now? Stay with me to find out. In the 1930s, Amelia Earhart was as famous as any movie star, friends with some of the most powerful people in America. She'd gotten so famous, not so much because she was a great pilot, but because she had a great agent. George Putnam was the man who'd made Charles Lindbergh a superstar after his flight across the Atlantic, and saw the chance to do the same thing with the woman he dubbed Lady Lindy. And sure enough, when Earhart became the first woman to fly the Atlantic in 1928, the media went mad, even though she was purely a passenger, not the pilot. In her own words, "I was just baggage, like a sack of potatoes." Over the next few years, though, she went on to achieve some genuinely historic feats: a solo transatlantic flight, speed records, along with the first solo crossing of the Pacific, and first solo flight from Hawaii by a woman, writing best-selling books about her adventures too, all carefully stage-managed, of course, by Putnam, who she eventually, and seemingly reluctantly, married. Far ahead of her time, Earhart was also a staunch champion of equal rights, a feminist icon, proving that women could do anything that men could. Such was her reputation that by 1935, she was a visiting faculty member at Purdue University in Indiana, acting as a technical advisor to the aeronautical department and offering career guidance to the female students. It was here that Earhart and Putnam hatched the plan for a round-the-world trip to be sponsored by Purdue. Vaguely promoted as a scientific expedition, in reality the trip was more to do with gaining material for the next book and raising her profile ready for its publication. But the trip didn't go well. By July 2nd, 1937, when the 39-year-old took off on her last ever flight, she'd already run into endless problems and setbacks, including a serious crash that many had blamed on her piloting. She'd also lost key members of her team, including her first-choice navigator. Neither she nor the only other person on board, replacement navigator Fred Noonan, were skilled radio operators, a factor that was to prove critical. Flight path that day was to take their Lockheed Electra on a 2,500-mile, 22-hour journey from New Guinea to a tiny speck of an island called Howland in the Central Pacific. There they'd refuel before the final leg of their trip onto Hawaii and home to California. At the island, the US Coast Guard cutter Itasca is waiting to guide them, but something goes badly wrong. Though the strength of their radio signals shows the aircraft must be very close to the island, Earhart and Noonan can't locate it, or hear the signals and messages being sent from the Coast Guard ship. All attempts to guide them in by radio fail. Low on fuel and increasingly desperate, Earhart's last confirmed message is at 8:43 a.m. "We are on the line 157 to 337. We will repeat this message. We will repeat this on 6210 kilocycles. Wait." But there was no more. And despite one of the most extensive and expensive searches in history, nothing definite has been seen or heard of her, Noonan, or their aircraft since that morning. If Earhart hadn't been so famous and so female, she'd probably have soon been forgotten, just as the many other pioneers who vanished during the era have been. But as it was her disappearance caused a worldwide sensation. And from the start, there were claims that the pair hadn't just crashed in the ocean and drowned. Across the Pacific, dozens of reports flooded in of distress messages being received, long after the aircraft would have run out of fuel. For any of them to have been genuine, Earhart must have managed to land the aircraft somewhere, on one of the dozens of tiny islands that dot the area. The problem being that many of those islands were under the control of Japan, already a country that was hostile towards the United States. Given the climate of the times, many theories have suggested that the pair had been captured by the Japanese. Perhaps, say a lot of theories, they did land somewhere under Japanese control, or ditched and were recovered by a Japanese ship. According to some theories, she was imprisoned and later died, or was put to work as one of the voices of Tokyo Rose, the famous Japanese radio service, broadcasting anti-American propaganda to US troops. A different spin on the same idea was that Earhart had been an American spy, the aircraft shot down, the crew captured, tortured, and eventually executed. In 2017, this photograph caused a lot of excitement. It was taken on an island called Jaluit, where the headquarters of the Imperial Japanese Navy garrison was based. According to Earhart's researcher and ex-FBI agent Les Kinney, the obviously Western man circled at the left is Fred Noonan. Sitting in the centre is Earhart herself. To the right is the wreck of their plane, seemingly being unloaded from a ship. Experts in facial recognition queued up to agree that yes, these must be the lost aviators, and the similarities do seem remarkable. According to Kinney and others, it proved the pair had crash-landed on nearby Mili Atoll before being forcibly taken to Jaluit for questioning. Searchers on Mili had apparently turned up concrete evidence, pieces of wreckage from the aircraft itself. So, mystery solved? No. Because a Japanese researcher named Kota Yamano soon worked out that the photo was from a Japanese travel guide, and that it had been published 2 years before Earhart and Noonan even went missing. As for the plane parts, Mili Atoll, like many of the local islands, was home to an airfield and is littered with wrecks from the Second World War. This was just one theory of many that claim Earhart was in Japanese hands. There are sworn testimonies from dozens of people placing her in Saipan, and that her place is now buried under a runway there. But Australian soldiers are said to have stumbled across the wreck of the Electra back in New Guinea, where the flight began. Again though, there is no actual evidence for any of these claims. There is nothing in Japanese military or government files to suggest Earhart was captured. George Putnam, no stranger to propaganda, took the Tokyo Rose story very seriously. But after listening to hours of broadcasts, he announced that none of the people involved sounded like his wife. Crucially, it seems likely that Earhart's plane was already desperately low on fuel when it arrived in the vicinity of Howland Island. According to radio operators on the Itasca, in one of the first messages they received that morning, she reported that they had perhaps half an hour of fuel left. If the operators were telling the truth, there's no way the Electra could have gotten anywhere near the locations that the Japanese capture theories claim, all many hours of flying time away. Okay, so what if they were not telling the truth? Perhaps the whole flight was a cover for spying, and the crew were never anywhere near Howland, but deliberately flew over Japanese-held territory. It's possible, but despite rumours, there is no evidence in Japanese or American archives or on the ground. And if the Japanese had captured such a famous figure, why would they keep it a secret when there was so much propaganda value to be had by showing that the US was using Earhart as a spy? Another Amelia in Japan theory revolves around this woman, an American banker named Irene Bolam. Well, actually, not Irene Bolam. According to Major Joe Gervais and author Joe Class, she was, According to their story, Earhart was rescued from a Japanese prison at the war's end and returned to the US to live out her life under a false identity. Irene herself apparently didn't recall who she really was, as she furiously denied the allegations, going on to sue Gervais and Klass for $1.5 million and winning. After her death made it unlikely she could sue anyone else, other people came out of the woodwork to back up the claims, including Catholic priest James F. Kelly, who said he'd personally helped to bring Amelia Irene back to America. But perhaps the weirdest of these theories suggests that the flyers did make it to one of the many islands in the area, only to be eaten by cannibals. So, mystery solved this time? Probably not. Such a strange disappearance naturally leads to speculation of extraterrestrial involvement. The Pacific is said to be a hotspot for UFO activity, centered around the mysterious Easter Island with its baffling alien-like statuses. It's been suggested that the ill-fated crew may have encountered an alien craft that caused them to crash, or even that they were abducted. Without any evidence at all to back up the claims, it's impossible to say. But there are those distress messages. They must prove Amelia landed somewhere, right? In the summer of 2023, the Titan submarine was lost over the Titanic wreck site. During the search for it, rescuers claimed they heard a regular distress signal being tapped out every half hour. But when the sub was found, it was clear its crew had died instantly before the search even began. While hunting for Air France Flight 447 that crashed off Brazil in 2009, and again in the search for Malaysian Airlines MH370 in 2014, rescuers racing to recover the black boxes reported hearing their signals on many occasions, only for the reports to be proved false. There are many other similar events that go to show that even today, people cling to any hope in these situations, and in the days after Earhart's disappearance, hundreds of messages were bouncing around the Pacific from searchers, military forces, and those who just wanted to help. With poor reception making many of them barely understandable, it's easy to see how messages about Earhart could be misinterpreted as messages from Earhart. And none of the post-flight distress calls have ever been proved to be genuine. On the other hand, there are some intriguing clues in the messages that tie in with one of the most famous and controversial theories of all. Because it's alleged that some originated from a then uninhabited speck in the ocean, then called Gardner Island, now known as Niku-Mororo. In the late 1980s, retired military aviators Tom Gannon and Tom Willey took a fresh look at Earhart's final radio message. "We are on the line 157 to 337. Following that heading, Gannon and Willey pinpointed the tiny atoll of Niku-Mororo as being a possible landing point for the Electra. They called in Rick Gillespie, director of the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, TIGHAR for short. Since then, the group have mounted over a dozen expeditions to the island, with some fascinating results. Among the items recovered were fragments of aircraft skin and plexiglass, a sextant case of the type used by Noonan, a knife, parts of a shoe the same size and make as those worn by Earhart, a jar of freckle ointment she was believed to use, and a bottle of the Benedictine tonic she was partial to. An old photograph shows what appears to be landing gear matching that of the Electra, which tied in with local accounts of aircraft wreckage. Using historical accounts of a skeleton found in the 1940s, Gillespie and his team uncovered a campsite with some remaining bones and artefacts. Though the original pathologist had decided the body was that of a local man, modern re-examination of his report suggests the skeleton was that of a woman of Earhart's size and build. Analysis of the distress messages does seem to indicate that some of them came from the area of Niku-Mororo, suggesting, says Gillespie, that they managed to land on the exposed reef surrounding the island, sending a few messages before the plane was swept away. then survived for a while longer before succumbing to hunger, thirst, or disease, their bodies consumed by the giant crabs that infest the island. In the summer of 2023, Gillespie revealed yet more new evidence, markings found on the metal fragment recovered, along with underwater images of what appeared to be an engine cowling matching that of an Electra, like Earhart's. So there we are. Mystery finally solved. Only, of course, it isn't. Despite TIGHAR's announcing each of these claims with great fanfare, none of the evidence can be tied conclusively to the missing plane or its crew. The island was settled not long after Earhart's disappearance, and later had a small detachment of US service personnel too. The so-called campsite, domestic items and the sextant case could equally be linked to later occupants, and there's no evidence Earhart was carrying things like Benedictine and freckle cream anyway. The landing gear turned out to be debris from a cargo ship wrecked on the island in the 1920s, an event that might also explain the skeleton that was found, as a number of the crew were lost during the accident. The new analysis that proves the bones are 99% likely to be Amelia's is based on a reinterpretation of an 80-year-old forensic report and an old photo of Earhart. And without DNA, it doesn't actually prove anything. The new image of what might be an aircraft cowling is actually an old image, and they're not sure where exactly it was taken. But that's probably irrelevant anyway. More recent searches of the entire area by TIGHAR and also famed explorer Bob Ballard, the man who found the wreck of Titanic, have shown no evidence of a cowling or any other wreckage that might belong to the Electra. It's a simple story with the new evidence about the piece of aircraft skin. For many years, TIGHAR experts had been coming up with theories why the piece didn't match any known panel on Earhart's Electra, including a wild guess that it was a repair panel. But eventually the evidence that it wasn't anything to do with the case became too strong for TIGHAR to ignore. The new markings, Gillespie announced, showed that the panel was from a World War II DC-3 transport aircraft, which most researchers had known for a while. And there are even bigger problems with the theory that Earhart and Noonan died on Niku-Mororo. The famous line 157 to 337 isn't a course, it's a line of position, a navigational technique to help work out where you actually are. And it only leads from Howland Island to Niku-Mororo if you're already at Howland Island, which, by definition, Earhart wasn't. What's more, even if they had gotten onto that particular course, perhaps a few miles south of Howland, they'd have passed other islands before reaching Niku-Mororo, and surely would have landed at the very first chance. But once again, the biggest stumbling block of all is distance. If, as the original radio logs say, the Electra was already very short of fuel when approaching Howland Island, it's a major stretch to imagine it could stay in the air for the 2.5-hour flight to Niku-Mororo. For all these reasons and more, after just one search, Bob Ballard concluded Earhart and Noonan were never there. But after raising millions of dollars from public donations to fund 12 searches over the years, Rick Gillespie and TIGHAR aren't giving up just yet. In many ways, Earhart's story is all about publicity. From her original fame to the sometimes desperate efforts that have been made to prove different theories about how she died. And along the way, the facts can get twisted into some strange shapes. In another famous missing aircraft case, the American bomber Lady Be Good was found in the middle of the Sahara Desert, 16 years after it was apparently lost on a raid over Italy. The most likely explanation was that its crew had made a simple navigational error and gotten lost, overflying their base and heading out into the desert until their fuel ran out. If we go back to the actual evidence, the radio logs from the Itasca made on the day of Earhart's disappearance, it seems very possible that the same thing happened to her. Over a course of 2,500 miles, most of it flown by compass in darkness, Even the tiniest error in navigation would have put them miles off course, easily enough to miss the tiny 20-mile-long speck of Howland. And the radio operators on Itasca were also able to get a rough fix on the aircraft's position. Instead of going north to the Japanese-held Marshall Islands, south to Niku-Maroro or west back to New Guinea, as so many have tried to prove, the last radio messages seemed to come from the east, suggesting the plane might have already passed the island without realising it. Though the seafloor to the north and west of Howland and around Niku-Maroro to the south has been searched, the area to the east has never been seriously investigated with the latest technology. It's very likely Earhart and Noonan, hampered by radio problems or just their lack of skill with it, simply ran out of fuel, ditched and drowned very soon after sending that final radio message, as her family believed at the time and still believe today. While teams of investigators plough time and money into searches in half a dozen different locations, announcing yet more new finds that prove their case, whatever remains of Amelia Earhart, Fred Noonan and the Electra may well lie only a few miles east of their intended destination, but under 16,000 feet of water, maybe never to be found. For more strange stories from the Pacific War, check out this video and be sure to like and subscribe. I'll be back with more mysterious stories soon. Thanks for watching.